So for this problem, I have two rational expressions adding together. When you have two rational expressions adding or subtracting one another, then you have to find the least common denominator. But before you even get into the least common denominator, you have to factor the denominator. Okay? So for these two expressions, I can rewrite this as 1 over the factor of x squared plus 9x minus 10. So once again, this is the quadratic formula or quadratic expressions. You need to find two numbers such that when you multiply together, you get -10, and when you add together, you get 9. And those numbers, if you think about this, that should be +10 and -1, which give you x plus 10 minus, which give you x plus 10 times x minus 1. And for the second expressions, you have x over x squared minus 4x plus 3. Once again, you get two numbers. When you multiply them together, you get +3. And when you subtract one another, you get -4. Which gives you x minus 1 times x minus 3. For the least common denominator, you need to count how many factors you have for both denominator. So for the first denominator, you have 1, 2. For the second denominator, you have x minus 1, which is a repeat factor. Right, so keep in mind that you don't have to repeat the factor, just count 1. And then another factor, which is x minus 3. So in the least common denominator, I have x plus 10. That's 1. I have x minus 1. And here for the second denominator, this is a repeat factor. Right? You already included in there. So we don't have to count this factor, but we need to count x minus 3. So this is the least common denominator that you need for adding the two fractions together. Now, how can you make the fraction in the first expressions become the least common denominator? You ask yourself, what is missing? So the first fraction is missing x minus 3. So what I'm going to do is that I will multiply x minus 3 and x minus 3 for both top and bottom. You can do the same for the second fractions. What is missing? You ask yourself that questions. The factor x minus 1 times x minus 3, you're missing the factor of x plus 10. So therefore, you can multiply the top by x plus 10 and multiply the bottom by x plus 10 as well. So now you can see the denominator is the same, right? So you can combine the numerator together. So that is x minus 3 plus x times x plus 10 all over x plus 10 times x minus 1 times x minus 3. Because both of the denominator is the same, you just have to write it once. From here, for the numerator, you can distribute the x into x plus 10. You will have x minus 3 plus x squared plus 10x over x plus 10 times x minus 1 times x minus 3. For the denominator, I want you to leave the answer like this because this is the product of factors. I don't want you to do anything else with the denominator. For the numerator, try to combine like terms together to finish your problem. So you have x squared plus 11x minus 3 over x plus 10 times x minus 1 times x minus 3. And this is the final answer. There's nothing else that you can do because for the numerator, you cannot further factorize. You cannot factor the numerator further.